out of the way, there we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the grand finals for the Mara Pre-UADC 2023 tournament. Congratulations to both teams for getting this far, and here's to a good, high-quality debate. My name is Mateo. I will be your chair for this evening. Pronouns are he and him, but please refer to the panel as a whole. Speaking of which, we do have a panel of 7 tonight. If I could ask them to introduce themselves in the order that they are listed on the tab. So that's Amelia first.
All right. Hello everyone. My name's Amelia. My pronouns are she, her, and yeah. And nice to see you all here and good luck for the final.
Hey, my name is Farhan. They or them. Refer to the panel as a whole. Good luck to both teams.
Hi, I'm also Farhan. No preferred gender pronouns. Congratulations, make it to the final. All the best. Wish you the best.
Hi, I'm Inami, she, her pronouns, but please refer to the panel as a whole. Best of luck to both of the teams and congratulations for making it to the finals.
Hi everyone, this is Tilika Singh, preferred pronouns she, her. All the best to both the teams.
Hi, this is Sai, no preferences. Good luck.
All right, now that we've gone through the whole panel, including our whole 2 Farhans, I was just wondering if it was possible for both teams to send their veto and their speaking positions in the chat quickly so we can fill in the ballot. So Up vetoed 1, which means Gov vetoed 3. Sweet. Yep. Sweet. Can I just get the speaker orders as well? Thank you, sir. Yep. Yep. Soul Robots. Soul Robots doesn't have the alliteration though. True. Name of an indie band. I would definitely listen to Soul Robots, the indie band. All right. Sorry for the delay, everyone. So ballot has been filled in. We all know the speaking times. We all know the rules by now. I will be sending a message in the chat to warn about the start and end of protected time, as well as 7 minutes, 7 minutes 15, 7 minutes 30. Please try to stick those timings. And please make sure to state your POI preference before you start speaking as well, whether it's verbal, written, or whatever, to make sure that there's clarity for all speakers. Unless anyone has any questions or concerns, I would like to open the debate and ask for the Prime Minister to speak to the motion. This House supports the use of SoulSync. Hear, hear.
Hi, everyone. Am I audible and visible? Cool, slay. POIs in chat, please. No audio. 3, 2, 1, let's go. Death is uncertain, but it is unfair. In the vast majority of instances, we lose people to suicide, sudden death, and other circumstances that are beyond our control. And try as we must, we can never get over them. Government bench is going to argue that the provisions for coping with loss in status quo are insufficient at best and harmful at worst. And then we're going to explain why people will do this responsibly. Even in the instance in which the soul sync stays with individuals forever, we will also defend that instance. Whether or not the debate is about the creation and widespread adoption or about the individual choice to voluntarily opt in and shut down the soul cycle as they please, the arguments still apply. The first thing I want to argue is how it is a significantly better coping mechanism in comparison to what we currently have in the status quo. What are the circumstances in which we experience a lot of death? The first is that death often stings because it is abrupt. In the vast majority of instances, people lose people often, not just in the time in which they were unsure as to whether or not they'd lose them, but also in the process we were unsure as to whether or not they'd lose them. The second is that this is abrupt nature supersizes regrets, things you never got to tell them, or you are unsure exactly of what their thought was of you at the point in time at which they died. You may have had unresolved conflict, a lack of closure. There are some things that you probably wanted to tell them but never got to tell them because you always thought you always had enough time in the world, but you never really did. The third is that the beautiful thing is that you will also remember your relationship relationship with them, the way that they told you they loved you, and the way that they would ask about you about their day. The fourth thing is that, especially for those who are likely to feel the need to use this, those are probably the people that have these precise attachments, the hang-ups, the lack of closure, but also the fondness and the love that is currently needed to be replicated in order for this person to properly cope with the fact that they have lost this person and they will never get them back. What this means is that for many of these people, they often cope in bad and insufficient ways. The first thing we want to prove is that they cope in a bad way. There are a couple of reasons why this is true. The first reason is because often this looks like clinging onto vices or anything such as drugs, for example, or for example, vices such as smoking or alcohol in order to numb or offset the overwhelming feeling inside your chest of having this missing person in your life. Second, it's also substitution of other individuals via situationships, new relationships, hookups, rebounds, getting in with new people that you may not necessarily feel an adequate connection to, but you want to fill the void. But third is that in the best case, you try to get closure, but it's often through the form of sour grape and often trying to hold on and remember as a bad way to cope. The third is that in reality, often you try to assume that it is always your fault for all the bad things that happen, but the reality is that you would have never known. It is this unique brand of lack of closure that forces people to mentally beat themselves up and degrade themselves as a result of someone's loss in their life. And often because of the abrupt nature, there's no proper way for them to navigate the course through this difficult process in their life. The second thing we want to prove is that the current existing mechanisms to cope with suffering are insufficient. The first thing you want to know is that you are not for sure what they would say. You possibly have lingering questions like, did they still love you? Did they forgive you for all the bad things you did to them? Do they forgive you for X, Y, and Z? But the reality is that you're unsure and you cannot replicate that discussion to the maximum possible way you possibly wanted. The fact on the way they speak it, the inflections in their voice, the jokes that they make, the things that they specifically tell you time and time again to make you feel safe and secure in their arms. As a result of the motion, we provide people a means, especially when they are at their lowest. We would suggest this allows them to transition better into a life of this person for 6 competitive reasons. The first reason is because you prevent the cold turkey loss of this individual and allow people to have an incremental experience. So from going from a world wherein their physical and their mental capacity was there, it's only just their mental capacity and the ability to speak to them. Second, you allow us to simulate conversations of closure, conversations with all of these lingering questions that often plague you in those nights wherein you are your saddest and most depressed are precisely the ones that you are more likely to gain closure from in comparison to opposition when there's no chance to gain any form of closure whatsoever. The third is that it focuses on personal and people finding closure. To the fact, for example, that people can relate to this individual, the fact that it's very personal because it's based on the way that they talk, the way that they argue in social media, for example. But fourth, it improves in accuracy over time because this is, well, as a matter of fact, AI, and therefore can learn to become more accurate and therefore more catering to your needs. Fifth, this is perfectly supplemented alongside other forms, things like therapy, things like building relationships with your other friends, and other things like that are currently insufficient because you are cold turking, but with this person can complement and become perfect. The sixth reason is because such that they get to set it aside over time as time passes and develop a new identity and life without them. Before I argue on why even the worst case is still beneficial, let's hear a POI from opposition.
If people rely on your robot as much as you say, why are they going to detach from it willingly over time, as you assert?
Okay, so there are 2 instances. There's like a spectrum of people that will attach to it within a short period of time, attach to it for a long period of time, and never detach from them from all. So generally what the first argument wants to prove is that regardless of how long they're likely to cling on to this individual, it is still very likely that in the short term, they're likely to do very bad things for them and for other people, and therefore this technology is necessary in order to avoid them to do that altogether. Second argument, why would it be used responsibly? The first reason is because there are other counterbalances who care about you and care about you and the other interests and your personal well-being. So for example, this is analogous to when a lot of your friends, family, and loved ones intervene when they notice that you're getting to start an addiction, when you're too codependent on relationship, because they have your best interest at heart. And especially now that they know that you've lost someone important to you, you're in a vulnerable position and therefore they get to observe the other things that you do. The second reason why it is likely to be used responsibly is because the nature of it, given that it's not a robot, much like what happens in Black Mirror, but rather it's just the the voice and, for example, the thought, it's easy to divorce from other aspects of your life, isolate it from when you go to work, when you hang out with your friends and other things like that. The third reason is because you personally would have an interest or the self-interest to self-regulate yourself, because life goes on. You have a job, you have other friends, obligations, and other connections with other individuals. You know that you lost this one person and you wouldn't want to lose other individuals or the other things that you have left in this material world. We would suggest that even in the instance in which they never get over it and never find love again, I would suggest that this is a fringe case. But moreover, who are we to judge on how people cope? The people who fit under this worst case scenario are the people who probably would be destructive as per argument one, and also wouldn't have moved on properly anyway. We permit people to keep photos, memories, never move out of the house they shared. I do not get why we should deprive these people of this technology. First and foremost, we largely mitigated it a while ago, but moreover, we're also less likely to allow people to cope in ways that directly harm themselves and other individuals. We take escapism and we suggest that it is still good. Let those who need to grieve, grieve. Affirm.
Thank you very much to the Prime Minister. Leader of Opposition, whenever you're ready, please begin your team's case. Here.
I'll take a POI from the chat. Probably a few minutes from the only opposition team. My pronouns are whatever you want them to be. And shout out to my teammates. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The first thing I'm going to do is immediately take down this idea of closure, because I want you to know that the only fiat that they have is to assume this technology exists. The problem with this is that the adoption and dissemination of this is going to be through corporations selling it, because the motion doesn't say that you get access to it for free, and there are 2 implications to this. The first is that corporations now get full access towards human decision-making calculus of people within the now, whereby they can literally read the minds off of dead people. They can have access towards human preferences to an extent that has never existed on this planet. This is bad, primarily because of the profit incentives of companies, which have showcased time and time again that they are willing to sell you more stuff to make you unhappy. The second is that the adoption of this in corporate is likely to exist in the tiers of access. The info site says that the AI has different functions. It can text and send voice messages and call. The marketing and pricing strategy for this is likely going to strip every dollar from you with the intention of it. It will materialize in things like subscription tiers, where only the rich are able to access the full scope of this technology. Due to the first reason as well, this means marketing for this technology will be pervasive to an extent that most people who opt into this are going to want to spend all of their money on this. This is bad, because they are selling you systematic unhappiness that we should never allow in principle, because it strips money away from those who need it. The most, i.e. majority of people who just have lost maybe their breadwinners in their family, people who need to pay for stuff like funerals or even financially support the rest of their family members. This is why you should judge this concept like PM says. There are 3 reasons for why this will make you unhappy. Hence, you don't ever get closure, therefore cutting off props impacts. The first is that you yourself know that this person is dead. Every waking moment that you spend with this AI, perceived being as alive on your device, will promote active cognitive dissonance to every bit of information that you get, because you're always going to doubt the sense of connection that you have with this AI, because you understand that they are dead intuitively, but corporations are going to feed you the false sense that they are still alive. The second is that you never actually get to grieve from this dead person or move on, because the parts of you that truly love this person will always want to keep talking to the bot. You keep talking to them instead of ever processing that they are dead, because your intuitive thought is always that you wish this person didn't die, like God themselves say. Most people are always going to default to reliance to this bot and spend time with it. This is why your therapy can never coexist with this, because therapy is going to tell you the person is dead. The bot simulates life. It simulates all of the dead person's thoughts and wants, such as their want to live. The third is that this is just time consuming. It takes away your future relationships, because you always spend time talking to everyone who is important to you who has died, which means you never move on to the next step. This means you never look for another partner, because your dead wife is still alive in your phone. Even if you find someone, you will always feel guilty, because the access that Gov impacts rely on, assume that the actors will always place value in the AI being somewhat real. And so you are even more attached to the robot, which stifles your grieving process and limits the amount of relationships you enter into the future. The comparative is one, and that was important because people in your future help you move on from people in the past because you have a new support structure. The comparative is one where you know that they're dead. You grieve with your family, which is important because dependence on the robot means no one in the family grieves either. And I wanted to note that this doesn't mean that everyone is going to want to grieve through this bot with you. Most people on this planet are religious. This means there will be a perception that you are meddling with death, which is a concept that most religions view as some form of black magic. So there will be splintering internally within the movement, the family members as well, when you go through the process. And this exists externally from religions too. Some people are going to view this as unproductive and try to talk you out of it. And so you get into fights, and this technology destroys any form of support structure that is conceivable. There's a second layer to this cognitive dissonance as well, because this AI is only an approximation. It is not a real person, and it is not fully representative of them and who they would have been. This is true for two reasons. The first is that your preferences and personality develops over time with exposure to your environment and your emotional state. The bot, at best, can only assess what you were when you died. This means that this can never be the same person because the bot has no legs and no body to experience the real world, to develop new preferences or develop into who they would have been, which contributes you to always doubting the bot because you never know the true intentions that they have when they make or say that they made certain decisions. The second is that even without environment, your brain grows, your prefrontal cortex and decision-making changes with biological growth throughout time as well. Since you know that they are dead, you are always going to question if that's actually what they believe, which is an additional layer which prevents you from grieving. Before I do the flip of this, I'll take a POI.
So there's a little bit of a tension in your case. You're arguing that they're so unrealistic to the point you will doubt them, but in the same breath, you are arguing that you'll be so addicted to the point you will abandon other aspects of your life. What is it really? Reconcile it right now.
It's not a contradiction. It's the fact that humans exist in a spectrum of emotions. In one moment, maybe you can feel as if this is the real person. In another moment, you are going to doubt yourself because they say something that you didn't think they would say. This creates the thing that I said, which is the impact, cognitive dissonance. On the flip, let's say that this person is actually who they were. If the person that died is not nice, they will still be not nice. If they were suicidal, they would still be suicidal, which mitigates their impacts on closure for sudden death. Instead, you're always going to question why you didn't help enough because the bot is going to say the reason I ended it is because you didn't help me enough as well. The comparative is one where you obviously knew this dead person in real life. You have memories and experiences of them. You know stuff about the dead person, and you can do things like imagine who they are in your head and imagine how they would have reacted to your circumstances. Imagine that you tell them that when you graduate, they would be proud of you, versus the approximation of this person who maybe would not have been proud of you, and you tell them this, and they say, I'm not proud of you that you graduated because they would not have been proud of you. You never get contradicting information with this idea in your head. On their side of the house, however, you question if you ever knew this person ever because you are basing your opinion on imperfect information and you act on it. You close up pathways to your thoughts because we as humans make up our own reasons for why people's actions made sense when they died. So when Gov says that you're going to be sad and you're going to do things that are destructive, you're going to do drugs, I don't know why someone who talks to their dad, who is abusive to them, is not going to make them so depressed to the extent that they are destructive in this way as well. You destroy the concept of closure under their side, which is why you ought to oppose.
Thank you very much to the Leader of Opposition for that fine speech. I'd now like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the debate. Hear.
Hello, am I audible? Sorry, lighting. Yeah, okay, my lighting's bad, never mind. I'll take my POI in the chat between the 5th and 6th minute. Starting my speech. In 3, 2, 1. I don't know how other people feel, but when my dad died in 2018, all I know is I would give anything in this world to just hear one of his old jokes and to just even hear him scold me for sneaking out of the house one more time. For opposition to withhold this to people who want it, of course, we're not forcing it on people, but for them to withhold it from people who want it because of their paranoia that people like me are stupid and think that ChatGPT is the person and get addicted is just a slap in the face of our human dignity, and it limits us for no reason. I'm going to answer three things. Firstly, what is this debate really about? Secondly, what are the standards for banning something? And thirdly, why is each outcome of responding to this technology still better? They still need to resolve a fundamental tension in their case where they say that you will cling on to the dead because they seem so alive, but if they are unrealistic, you would doubt them. Sure, people respond at different times, but if they respond differently at different times, then you can stop using this. If your dad was abusive, then don't use the technology, just don't deprive the rest of society from it, right? Two possible interpretations in the motion that we can win on. Firstly, if this is the personal use, and this is something that Bea flagged, right? Because assuming that we're doing the Black Mirror interpretation of this motion, that means that the technology exists, and this is the personal decision of if we want to use it or not. If you choose not to use it, despite other people using it, then you still lose on opposition because you will always have the existential dread of not just feeling like you're missing out, but the feeling that perhaps other people have closure about it. That's why, at least on our side, you would use it not even just because you think it'll solve all your problems. You just want to use it to see what it will do to you because you don't feel the regret of not even trying to find closure and use the big optionality of ways to find that closure. You are losing in this one clear interpretation of the debate. But secondly, if this is a when do you oppose the use of something societal debate, we simply win from what Bea proved to you, that we do not have epistemic access to how all people best cope, right? How dare you prescribe the best way of coping to these people, which is throwing yourself into new relationships? In reality, there are some people who, are good at throwing themselves into a new relationship. Some people who do just want to distract themselves and not remember the dead person so they can move on. But knowing that some people need some level of closure, they need to wean themselves off of the person by not just losing them completely, but by being able to talk to them to the point that you've asked them all the questions you wanted to ask, and therefore that's how you cope. Since we don't have epistemic access to this, and secondly, the state fails to provide accessibility to the kinds of alternatives that you want, right? Which is why you also lose the debate because you're uncomparative, right? If you say that it's expensive and this will be tiered in a bunch of ways, firstly, we're trying to defend the usage of this technology, not the sale of it. I think that this is an AI model. It's probably something that can be quite cheap to run, so it can be free like ChatGPT, and you can even regulate it because it's such a philosophical, like, big societal impact technology. You can regulate it from the state that you can only use it non-profit, or you can only have one baseline version. You have no tiered access. Since the state fails to provide accessibility to alternatives like therapy, and that in status quo, you are uncomparative, when Bea told you that you don't really forbid people from not being able to move on. People just stay in their houses and don't move out of their partner's home. They still project their partner onto other people and therefore expect things from them and then abuse those other lovers when they can't give it to them. These are the outcomes that, firstly, not only are worse on your side, not symmetric, but worse, but secondly, that they cause harm to much more people. So in terms of the responsibility of the state, based on epistemic access, you should definitely allow people to use this. Let's analyze the three different outcomes in this debate. Firstly, if people use it for closure. Secondly, if it fails and it's not that realistic. But thirdly, if it's so good that people get addicted to talking to these people. The first thing is that we've proven that you're more likely to use this as closure. We flip all of the characterizations that leader of opposition said. If it's true that this is a very incomplete technology, you don't have physical touch, there's no evolution of the AI because it's just based on old data and it doesn't really change, then that's a good thing because that's proof that people are more likely to use this as closure, right? They obviously have to move on from their dad's death eventually, but at least they don't have to worry or just continue to live with the fact that you don't know what your dad was thinking of you the last moment that they died. The fact that the prerequisite to moving on to more people is that you just want to know, like, if they're proud of you. And the likely thing is that you will be able to get their information at the time. And you're more likely to get the best version of these people. Why is this the case? The last standing point from leader of opposition is when they said that, oh, you're probably going to have an abusive father. Again, firstly, if they're abusive, don't use the technology. But secondly, you probably represent the best version of yourself on social media. Remember that the imperfection of this algorithm is probably a good thing, because if online, you usually keep up appearances, right? In public spaces, which you will have the data that this AI is based on, you are usually positive. You're probably telling people that you're proud of your kid because you don't want your pride to be hurt. Or, on social media, people generally post about the happiest memories. You don't usually post about the horrible family reunions on social media. So therefore, if you want to, on your side, imagine that people, are proud of you, etc., then firstly, they're likely to have the best version of themselves in the AI, and they're likely to say that they're proud of you already. But secondly, they're also more likely to be still realistic to a certain extent. It's based on their mannerisms, their patterns, which are all oftentimes lost to time when someone dies on you, right? Those are the more added levels of realism while maintaining the positivity that we have. Now, if the tech fails and it's not that realistic, I've already told you why you're more likely to use this for closure. But even if you don't use this for closure, then at least you can use this to reminisce. Oftentimes, you talk to ChatGPT because it's just like very thought-provoking and very fulfilling, right? Even if it's inaccurate in its response, then you will remember that, oh, my dad wasn't like this. He was so much better. He was so much smarter, and he loved me so much more. And that's what brings people towards the happy parts of people's death. Part of closure is to forget the bad things that happened to other people. Even if they abuse you to a certain extent, you don't want to hold on to your hatred for them because that stops you from growing. So having this best version of the person to talk to you means that you can probably correct this and reminisce about how good of a person they are so that you can move on. But even in the worst case, if you get addicted, we already proven to you that these are the type of people who wouldn't have moved on your side and would have hurt themselves and other people like with vices, etc. We give them a better alternative and we respect people's right to choose.
Thank you very much to the Deputy Prime Minister for that fine speech. I'd now like to welcome Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue the debate. Here.
Hello, can you hear and see me? Can anyone hear and see me?
Yeah, perfect.
Ready.
Okay, thank you. My name is Shireen Shiha. I'll take POS in the chat. I'll take you on 5, hopefully. And I just want to shout out to all Sunway members if y'all are here watching. Also shout out to my teammates, Rohan and Salleh. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The reason government bench loses is because they assume people can grieve healthily on their side of the house, but all of a sudden on our side, they must go to things like alcohol and drugs, and they're all of a sudden going to spiral. I think we have to adjudicate and debate the emotion on an assumption wherein both individuals on either side of the house are probably able to decide for themselves what is healthy and what is not. I'm going to first flag 2 observations at the top of my speech before going into the crux of my debate itself. The first thing I want to establish is the idea of people being able to use it whenever they want, as said by the speaker before me, and we should respect the right of people to choose. 1, a choice is only good if the outcomes are good, which they fail to prove. Number 2, they don't actually prove if people's want in the first place is something we should legitimize or validate, because probably when your loved one just passed away, or you're going through an intense heartbreak, you're under duress and are unable to make a choice that is reflective of the most viable outcome for yourself. This means you'll probably opt into the technology because you feel like it's the only way out, because you're blurred by your grief and you're not sure if it's going to lead to good outcomes for you. Third, you don't know if it's going to be good for you, as conceded by the speaker before me themselves. This means that you can either get dependent because you never knew how much you would have to rely on it, or you don't know if it's going to succeed in helping you grieve, which means they don't contend a world in which a technology fails. Let's say you put all of your effort and mental energy into wanting to grieve the loss of your loved one, or hear your father's words again in the voice of the AI, but now you don't feel any sense of reminiscence or any sense of consolation. What happens then? They don't contend a world where what if the technology fails and you're left even worse, because not only do you have to grieve the loss of your loved one on your own now, but you feel betrayed by the technology because it was not able to succeed in the thing you bought it for. But the second thing I want to point out is the debate is not about destructive tendencies or coping mechanisms as per the PM and DPM. The reason for this is simple. the buying of the technology is not synonymous with not doing anything else, because PM themselves also says they can supplement the act of using the AI with things like therapy or things like thought speak, which means you can also probably supplement it with alcohol or other vices like hookups if you want to as well, which means the symmetricity of the harm is equal, unlike what the DPM tried to assert, which means if people on our side go to alcohol to grieve, they're likely going to also do it on your side if they feel like they want to do it alongside the AI that they want, which means harm of that is symmetrical. You needed to prove why the use of the technology automatically means you're going to grieve in a way that's healthy, to the point where you no longer have to rely on other vices, which they haven't proven, and they can't do it in WIP right now. The first half of my speech is going to discuss how you grieve, and the second is going to discuss the larger scope of the technology's use in terms of society itself, beyond just individual capacities of relationships. The first question I want to ask in the first half of my speech is, does it help you grieve? And I want to flag the tension that the other speakers were accusing us of, because it's not a knife or a tension, because our first speaker already explained to you why it's likely going to be ineffective to mitigate the benefits they have. The second claim we had in terms of how you're going to get addicted to it is actually their best case scenario, which if you look at your judge manual is an even if scenario that takes the charitable case of the other team. So the first thing we claim is that it doesn't help you grieve for all the reasons of Salleh's speech, that it's inaccurate, it's unlikely going to let you feel the same level of emotional connection you want, and you yourself are going to be questioning the veracity of its answers to you. But the even if of this is when you do think that it's so accurate to the point where it's mimicking your parents outright, or it's mimicking the loss of your loved ones, you're going to feel dependent on it. And the reason why it's an innate harm and not just a mitigation is because it actively impedes your ability to grieve, which the speakers before me never responded to. There are three reasons why it's likely going to cause you to not want to grieve in a way that's healthy. One, you feel like you can rely on it only as your only mechanism of coping, which means you're less open to things like therapy or talking to your family members or discussing it openly because you feel like you have your father that you can still talk to despite him being in a robot. But secondly, you continuously go back to it, which means even if one day you open the chat box and it doesn't mimic the answer you want, you go back to it the next day because you feel like there's a chance it can get better. There's a chance that they're going to answer me the way that I want. And you continuously go back to it despite feeling a sense of disappointment. But third, you also just end up deluding yourself sometimes, where you might not remember your father the way you did, but the chat box is giving you a false sense of security and hope because it's the only thing you can hold on to. And those are all reasons why you feel a sense of attachment to it. It's going to impede your ability to want to go outwards and find levels of engagement or solace to yourself that are actually going to be helpful. But the second important question I want to ask is this necessary for the grieving process? Because I think the majority of the case coming from government bench assumes that the grief of this individual can only be solved by the existence of the AI. But we talked to you in Salleh as why that's not true, and we have natural mechanisms in status quo to prove why you can grieve independently. 4 things. 1, PM themselves say you have natural incentives to want to get back on your feet. Things like going back to work or going back out with your friends and living a normal life are all incentives for you to want to grieve independent of the existence of an AI. But secondly, you can still imagine the things that your father or your loved one can say to you without the AI. And the reason for this is because you likely know what they're going to answer. You likely know what your father's going to say to you if you had a question to ask. You know if your mother's going to be proud of you if you get an A star on a test, which means you know these things about your parents without having an AI to validate it, which means even in our comparative where you are unable to hear your voice or the text messages of your mother, you can still remember those memories as for the photographs that PM says themselves still exist in our comparative. But third, it's also when the absence of the AI pushes you to want to access things like therapy independent of yourself that are able to help you move on, because you're reality checked to know that they're no longer here with you and you have to move on in a way that's healthy. But the last reason why it's likely going to be enabling on our side of the house in terms of like consoling your grief is because you are able to do it together with your family. Because I want to note the best case of the government bench here is if everyone in your family is reliant upon the AI to reminisce about the death of your loved one, all of you are unlikely going to want to move on together because all of you are reliant upon the same technology and all of you want to continuously hear the voice of your dead father at the end of the day, which means you don't have a sense of collective push forward and you rely upon that thing together. And the comparative on our side is when you can rely on your family members to check you and say, you need to snap out of it and come with us together to move on because we have to go back because life must go on without us. Yes, POI.
So good things like being proud for doing good things, but are obviously going to happen. But in more difficult instances like fights, regrets, and all the stuff that is discussed at PM and DPM, it is not answered. This does not engage with the actual.
Okay, the problem here is you don't explain why resolving that sense of closure is the pivotal necessitating point for grief. If I can argue to you, which I did, that you can still find solace on our side of the house, it's still a level of grief that's sufficient. You need to explain why the grief we have is insufficient, which you've never done in your speeches. But the last thing I want to explain is how society is going to use the technology to perpetuate things like cults of personality. I think it's very likely due to corporate incentives of profit or the political incentive to want to keep legacies alive to upload the psyche or personalities, of cults of personality like Trump, in order to keep their legacies alive. The reason this is harmful is because it stagnates the political progression of society insofar as you're able to keep the legacy and ideologies of these figures in existence. This looks like perpetuating extreme ideologies because you have to be extreme and radical to have a cult of personality in the first place, like Trump or Imran Khan. But you also can justify the use of this AI to the implementation of policies that they would want. To say things like, look, the AI says Trump would have wanted this, and therefore we can implement it on our side of the house. The reason it's an impact that's important in the debate is because it happens independent of a clash of grief that the other team seems to have to focus on, but it also means the scale of the impact is worse because it affects the entirety of society's progress and not just your individual attachment to grief. It is unfortunate that people leave us at an untimely matter when we're not ready for, but it is still a reality that we have to live in. For those reasons, you must oppose.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, for that fine speech. I'd now like to welcome the government whip to continue their team's case. Hear, hear.
Hello, am I audible? Is this fine? Sorry, I can't
Loud
see
and
anymore
clear.
because I'm on data. So yeah. All right, thank you, thank you.
Loud and clear, but obviously we can't see you.
Oh yeah, sorry. It is quite raining in the Philippines. All right. It is not true that all our benefits rely on outcomes materializing. We talk about how you grieve is deeply personal, and oftentimes the current alternatives that are afforded to people are ones that are insufficient, and therefore we should allow people to access a pathway for them to grieve that they think is the most appropriate given their relationship with that individual. But what's also important is that you have a sunk cost, which makes it that if you, for example, had the autonomy to choose, it automatically makes it that any ability that you had to your ability to opt into that specific coping mechanism is likely to be more impactful because you had the ability to, for example, talk with your dad, etc., which is likely to be very important to the individual. But the last thing I want to note here is that they're relying the assumption that false hope is inherently bad. I think false hope is inherently good. Maybe it is not true that, for example, your friends like you. Maybe it is not true that your dad really missed you. But for example, hearing that he did miss you, because let's say that's the data that was collected, probably means that you are still happy or that you can move on. Or maybe that, for example, you don't move on, but you think you can. That is often the driving force for individuals to opt into more productive behavior instead of being self-destructive. So I argue that even if false hope is inherently the case we have to defend, the impacts are very much real. Before I go on with the issues, let me deal with this argument from the previous speaker that if Trump wills a policy with this technology, people will implement it. Number one, deep fake, misinformation. Presumably, if someone wanted to say in Trump's name that you, for example, would implement a policy, there are other ways to fake that. Like, I'm just not sure why this is exclusive to the motion. But secondly, the GOP will say it regardless. Like, for example, Trump dies. They'll be like, Trump supporters. Trump actually wanted you to put that policy. So, like, I'm just, like, unsure as to why this is the unique tipping point, and I think the argument actually lacked a lot of effort and time in demonstrating as to why it's the most likely alternative or the use of this technology. On to the first issue, will people be able to healthily detach themselves? Their first analysis here is to say that you'll have reliance because you wish they still exist. This is the main premise that they give as to why people will be overly attached. The first thing I want to note is that we told you that you know they're not real, and we give you so many illustrations and reasons. They're not a robot. You can only talk to them sometimes because you have to go to work. Everyone else in your family knows that they died, and they probably talk to you about how they died, or for example, their feelings of how or their regrets when they died. You probably saw them in their funeral. You probably saw them getting buried. I think in that instance, the average person probably knows that they're dead. The reason why this is important is because this proves as to why the average person, even if they're in an emotionally volatile state, probably is rational enough to assume that what they're saying, that rather the presence of this technology does not actually substitute for the person there. Their response to the call out that we launched on the POI to the first speaker was to say that people have a spectrum of emotions. They say that one day you believe it's real and the other day you do not. Why is this response terminal to their case? This proves self-regulation, which disproves over-reliance. Why? If it is true that sometimes you are aware it is fake, and that other days, for example, you know that it is real, the harms of it, for example, being real disappear and vice versa. But also, this proves that even if you get absorbed into the technology, you have the ability to snap out of it 3 days out of the week. What that means is that all their harms about attachment are extremely short-term at best. So thank you for that response. The second thing is that they say you have detachment because you feel guilty for moving on. Unlikely, you see your other friends and family members are moving on. They're likely to encourage you to do it, and they reassure you that it is okay. But secondly, you know that they're dead. You know that factually you are not cheating on your dead wife. So a lot of this extraneous analysis just does not stand. What is important, and I want you to understand, this is like the weighing in under this issue. There are people who cannot move on from both sides. We acknowledge that. On our side, they're texting their dead dad. On opposition side, they're drinking, they're doing actions that actively harm themselves. The fact that opposition just assumes, for example, that texting your dead dad on the phone is far worse than almost, for example, drinking yourself to the point to be hospitalized is ridiculous. The comparative stance on our side, we make it that the worst forms of, for example, being toxic to yourself or to other individuals is less likely to be an option. Second issue, will this help people move on? They say a couple of things here. Firstly, if they're suicidal, they will still be suicidal, and that will trigger you. One, they're likely to be represented in their best form, like we talked about at first speaker. What that means is that they're probably not suicidal for 20 years of their life. Not all collective data will be suicidal texts, and probably you will not want to ask about suicide if the person that you love, committed suicide. So I'm just like not sure as to why this is likely to be the case. Secondly, they say you will question if you really know the person who died. I just want to point out that the mechanism they provide under this is that the AI is based on imperfect information. But people that you ask, like friends and family, can also have varying opinions on the same person. So that's also imperfect. But secondly, if the collected data is inherently contradicting, it also probably means that what people know is equally as confusing and contradicting as well. So you don't really prove the comparative there. They say at second speaker, you can supplement the technology with toxic behavior. You have limited time. You have limited money. As characterized in Bea's speech to no response, you still have other obligations and responsibilities in your life. If usually people are so bad on both sides, okay, fine, then they're both bad on both sides. I'm not sure as to why they make that problem any better either. What are the benefits you provided to you that are largely unresponded to? Incremental change, conversations of closure, supplemented along other types of support. Therapy cannot replace talking to your dead mom. Another aspect you can consider as well in terms of weighing the debate is that the technology exists either way, right? So you have a large uncertainty and regret if you are the only person, for example, in your immediate community that doesn't opt into that technology because you always wonder what it could have said to you, always wonder that it could have made you feel better. So I argue that in that scenario, the regret is likely to be far, far worse under their side. POI. None? Okay, so third argument on accessibility and corporate incentives. One, this argument applies to commercializing anything, especially their counterfactual and therapy. Therapy is actually quite expensive for the average person. Therapy is often, for example, limited to your geographical location. So if we say that, for example, that the standard to hating something is if people do not access it, then on their side, they probably shouldn't support, for example, therapy either. But secondly, corporate incentives exist that will promote accessibility. There's a demand from everyone because everyone experiences grief. So therefore, there's a corporate incentive to tap into all of these markets. Technology, especially AI, is relatively easy to replicate. There's likely to be competitive companies or firms that will compete in terms of price and quality, etc. The last thing I want to point here, and this is the response here from second speaker. If it fails, you will feel sad and then get mad at the technology company. One, if it is true it will fail, then the attachment they talk about will not happen. But secondly, if it does, I think there's a perverse incentive to make sure that the corporation will make sure that it will not fail because they will just lose all reputation and credibility. They'll probably have market testing. Like, I'm just incredibly unsure as to why this argument is likely to manifest. What they've told you in this speech is very, very clear. The alternative, if you're talking about people who cannot move on, is drinking, harming people around you, being toxic and lashing out at your family versus just an app on the phone. That is the absolute worst case they posit in the debate. And even in that case, we still win very clearly. For all of those reasons, we urge you to propose.
Thank you very much to the government whip for that fine speech. I'd now like to welcome the opposition whip to conclude the substantive portion of this debate. Here.
Hello, everyone. Am I visible and audible?
You are whenever you're ready.
Oh, thank you for the hype in the audience chat. I'll be taking POIs verbally. I'm not looking at the chat. Starting my speech. Wait, let me make this fit to page. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. What is the closure that we get from government? Because I think that the benefits they give you at the end of the day are not of any significance anyway. Because they say that you can ask them what they thought of you. I mean, if it's something that they kept to themselves, you will never learn anything new. I don't think that their weird interpretation of how AI works is that it will get better over time. That's not true. AI gets better when it gets more information. The person is dead. You're not going to get any more data from them. It's always going to be the same level. I don't think they are suddenly going to be able to approximate what were these hidden things that they had, the things that they never told anyone based on their interactions online. This is insane for them to try and argue that that's what you're going to get. But we never hear any reasons as to why the robot will know any more than you already know at the end of the day, because you fundamentally interact in a very, very proximate way with this individual, probably outside the realm of what happens on the internet as well. So you probably know even more things that this AI is going to know at the end of the day. The point in time where it is true, the relationship that you're getting doesn't evolve in any way. It is simply you prolonging your voyeuristic nature of this relationship by watching a video of them and listening to their voice, which leads me to alternatives. And I want to point this out because the PM was like, status quo is not enough. And they talk about how people are abusing drugs and that's the alternative. No, because if all you want to do is listen to their voice and see how they look and things that they already said many, many times, if that's the only benefit, like, okay, just make some home videos, make a photo book. If individuals on your side allow for their data to be collected for what I assume is for this sole purpose, I would assume that these individuals, in the absence of this product or in absence of using this product, would still want to preserve memories and would likely have these memories frozen within scrapbooking, within home videos, which access the same exact benefits that you get on your side with no additional things on their side. So I don't get what is this significant new amount of positive material we're getting on their side, especially when they try and frame it as there's this huge problem with status quo, which they never actually argue to any reasonable way. Strategic callouts here. I want to flag out how uncomparative the PM speech was. Like everything they said about how people around you will have incentives to keep you out of addiction and you will internally resolve your issues, have to go to work, equally applies to the exact same harms they talk about vices, which one was already extremely unrealistic, like these people are going to turn to drugs, but it's probably more likely that you're going to drag these people away from drugs than this robot at the end of the day, because it's easily seen as something you can take away from them. But also, I don't think that people are going to drag you away from therapy, because therapy is something that is good. But they never respond to Salleh's argument as to why therapy is something that's counterproductive and doesn't work while you use the robot. Because when you're using the soul sync, whatever you call it, it's because you are trying to perceive it as these individuals are still alive. Like that's the whole appeal of it, that these people are still alive and you're prolonging their life. The whole point of therapy is dealing with the fact that these people they are lost. I don't think their argument as to, okay, now they're in the in-between, so we can do both things at once, that even makes sense, because they never prove to you why this cognitive dissonance is something that these individuals can deal with at the end of the day, and why being in this middle ground where there's this huge gray area makes it easier for these people to process loss, especially when you're under huge amounts of stress, where it's unlikely for you to make extreme complex decisions at the end of the day. I think therapy at the end of the day, we want to make it as effective as possible, meaning we have to take away their access to these kinds of things at the end of the day. But also the idea that we are in tension and the contradiction, we argue to you that it's unlikely that they have significant amounts of new information, meaning it's a bare bones representation, which means they can't talk about finding the things about your dad that you didn't know because no one knows. And the way that they carry themselves online is likely insignificant in resolving these issues. But you need to understand that we are being as charitable as possible by engaging with, even if these things are realistic, so we win on those grounds as well, because I'm not going to have a split decision in this final. But also one more comment on the government whip. They said they'll portray the best version of these persons' lives. So the father that you're talking to is this guy back in 2010 and not the guy that recently died. I don't see why this is helpful at all. I'm so confused as to why they keep jumping characterizations, pretending it came out from PM every time they can't think of a response. I think that is reason alone for you to discredit most of the things they say. But also DPM tries and make it so like, oh, you can't allow no one to have this as long as it benefits one person, it is good. That is not what this house supports mean, because this house supports means you say it's good in almost all of the instances in which it happens. That's something they have to defend. Don't let them cop out of this debate by thinking that's all. On to the clashes. This thing about closure. What does it help you grieve? I think the entire government hinges on this idea, which makes it extremely important, because PM is like, we will justify why it's okay to use forever, but that never came out in any of their speeches. So this is where the end of their analysis actually stands. And the point in time where we can show you that, they aren't going to be able to move on, they are going to lose this debate. What do we say? Counterproductive to therapy. Came out in Salleh's speech. What was the response? Absolutely nothing. We told you why the likely coping mechanism on our side isn't going to be turning to drugs and turning to alcohol, because if that was the case, I don't see why these things won't happen on your side as well, where you want to deal with their loss. Because on our side, you want to deal with your loss, you want to be emotionally recover from these kinds of things. It's probably that you are going to seek therapy. Even if not therapy, you're going to talk to other individuals and talk about the loss that you face. It is on your side where you're actively gaslighting yourselves that to a certain extent, these individuals are still alive and I can still talk to them. Yeah, it's great to talk to people that maybe we miss them, but the point in time where you aren't going to deal with the fact that they are gone, you are never going to be able to move on. You're never going to be able to reattach your life and be able to live that type of life that is worth living, because you are able to reconcile that with yourself. What they said then was that they never engaged with this idea from Salleh. They never engaged with the idea of religious antagonism, which was going to tear up the family in certain instances. The Gov Whip suddenly talks about false hope. I don't get this, because the debate was never about either side supporting different responses, because this argument necessitates them to have proven that only on their side their parent loves you and on our side they don't. But if they are based on real information, I don't see why false hope applies in this debate. They never gave a verbal POI. I want to flag that. But why do we win? I mean, they never proved to you why leaving because the only mech they gave you was that society and people are going to drag you away from this. Why is there going to be closure? People don't drag you away from therapy. They say that there's something that's good for you. This is the only viable way that people are going to reconcile this death and be able to live that good lives at the end of the day. Why is this important in this debate? We win on their metric. The only point where they keep talking about closure, we win on closure. We have the most effective closure and the healthiest closure. We allow individuals to move on, get better over time. But then also on this idea of cults of personality that come from Shireen's speech that they really dismiss at the end of the day, I think this is the largest harm in this debate, because it doesn't apply only at the personal level. Shireen tells you the point in time where you give a platform for individuals who have cults of personality to act past their death, it is likely that people still listen to them and prevent change within the political sphere. Why are these things significantly harmful within this debate? The point in time where there's political stagnancy, that means that new ideas and more progressive ideas are unlikely going to be pushed for within society. We say that it is on their side where these cults of personality are going to exist and going to prevent change from happening. Their only response was, oh, deepfake exists. I think SoulSync provides much more legitimacy, deepfake at best, mitigation. Why do we win? Because we actually have exclusive arguments. Proud to oppose.
Thank you very much to the opposition whip for that fine speech. I'd now like to welcome the negative reply speaker to start off the reply segment of the debate. Here.
Okay, it's me again. I'm assuming I should be fine because I didn't change anything. Okay, I'm assuming I'm fine. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. It is not enough to win a debate by saying that maybe some choices are good, maybe some people can make the good choice, and if that's the case, then the choice itself is enough for us to defend. Government bench had to defend a world where even people making the worst of the choices when it comes to the use of the technology is one that is justifiable. They ran away from this burden by saying that if we prove that the agency to choose is itself good, we win, but they don't even prove that to begin with. I've got 3 technical observations on government bench before I get into the overview of the debate. The first is they don't prove the biggest harm that they keep claiming being exclusive to us at the House. Because I've said to you in my speech itself, choosing to use the AI is not an automatic switch to not drink alcohol or not do drugs or go to other vices to grieve, which means they had to prove why it's an exclusive switch to not do those things at the same time. So at best, the harm is symmetrical and not something you can credit as a loss for our team. Second, they don't prove the solvency of the technology in the first place. Salleh gave you multiple reasons why it's likely going to lead to ineffective grieving because it's inaccurate or you question the veracity of it. And the only response we get is, well, at least you're able to somehow understand that it's part of your grieving process and you're able to derive some benefit from it. They can't win by saying you have some derived fulfillment. They needed to explain how you're able to get a sense of fulfillment or consolation from hearing an artificial remake of your father's voice. But the third reason why they lose the debate is they never contended a world where this technology does not work. I told you in my speech that because of the analysis we gave you in terms of first and second speeches, that there is a very clear likelihood that technology isn't going to work. Your grieving process is going to be worse, and you're likely going to be left off unable to move on because you feel attached to it. The only response we get is, well, we knifed, which we didn't, by the way, or well, at least it's a choice. They needed to engage in a charitable context where they need to either mitigate why this thing is unlikely to fail, or at best defend the failure of it, which they never do. All of those reasons mean that the rigor of our case automatically beats theirs insofar as do not prove why our harms do not stand. The first question I want to ask is, does the AI help you grieve? The only thing we get in terms of a push from government bench is that it does give you the choice to listen to things or to get consolation or closure from the sudden deaths of your loved ones. We told you down our bench that even in the best case where it's a good mimic or a good representation of your loved one, it's still unlikely going to help you in the grieving process, because I don't know why it's better than the current tools we have in status quo. They don't argue to us why the mechanism of listening or reading a chat box made by an AI replicating your father is automatically or morally better than the tools we have currently. I don't know why therapy is insufficient. I don't know why talking to your father about the loss of your mother is insufficient. I don't know why your own internal processes are insufficient enough to warrant the existence of an entirely new AI. But second, it comes at the cost of never moving on, because you're likely going to get attached to it, because you feel like it's something that you cannot live without. If what government's framing is true, that these individuals are likely the most sudden, the ones facing the most sudden deaths, or the ones that are facing the most triggering circumstance, they have even worse time wanting to let go because they have to rely on it for a sense of solution. That's why all of my arguments in my speech were true and important in the round, because it shows you why dependency is so harmful in impeding your therapy process, impeding your ability to grieve and open up, because you still have to rely on this robot in order to feel some sense of solace, which you are unable to move on from in the long term. The second question I want to ask is the choice itself good? Let's take government at the absolute best and assume that the availability of this AI is a net impact in the debate, which they don't argue for, by the way. I would argue that even in the worst instances, the choice itself cannot be justified, because they had to prove the choice leading to good outcomes to justify the choice itself. We don't really allow people to smoke because we know it's going to harm their lungs, which is why we don't justify the choice of being able to smoke in the first place. But even if you wanted to justify the choice as a unique argument they had, they never weighed it against all of our harms, which means they had to argue why the agency of choice, or the principle of being able to maybe choose this AI being good for you, outweighs all of the very certain harms we argued in terms of dependency, in terms of your entire family relying upon the same AI and therefore never moving on together because you're all in a hive mind, or the fact that it's counterproductive towards other methods of grieving because your therapist is telling you they're dead, but you still believe they're alive and are still attached to it. At the end of my speech, how do you weigh the round? They don't prove any exclusive harm upon us, nor do they prove an exclusive benefit, insofar as the mechanisms for grieving are sufficient in status quo, which they never respond against, by the way. This means that we prove an exclusive harm, and like Rohan said, because of that, we win the debate. Once again, people leaving us is a bad thing, but it is a reality that we have to be real in. That's why the realest win goes to opposition.
Thank you very much to the negative reply speaker for that fine speech. And to close out the debate, the reply segment, and the tournament, I'd like to welcome the Afro-reply speaker. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
You are whenever you're ready.
All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 4 independent win conditions. You can give us the win for any of the 4. But before that, do not even credit their argument about cults of personality. It is dead in the water. 3 reasons. 1, Shireen did not build it well. It got like 30 seconds. Secondly, we proved that there's no tipping point analysis, and the whip had the chance to reply to this, but they didn't. We told you that weaponization is done by the party. And thirdly, you shouldn't believe it because their own analysis says that you're only just using old chat logs to assemble a good new thing, which is why if you're just using old chat logs and you're only getting yourself access to information you already know, then you already know the cults of personalities, old personality, you have their manifestos and you have their speeches, and so on their side, if you add a deep fake to it, it's just as bad. That's not part of the debate. What are the reasons why we win? Firstly, because they keep pivoting their stance. LO says it's too accurate, DLO says it's not accurate, and Whip says probably you just have the same thing. It's already stuff that you already know, and yet you still have all of the harms. They keep pivoting their stance. They never take a hardline trade-off. We do this. Second reason why they should lose. Because they keep their contradictions actually directly impact their harms, right? They try to co-opt all of our benefits, but they cannot. Firstly, they say that they support people imagining their own loved ones, but that's the same kind of toxic escapism. They do not reply when we ask, well, are you allowed to still stay in the house of your loved one because you don't move on then? They never respond to that, assuming that they also support that on their side. At the last moment, in reply speech, they build that they want to ban smoking and drinking, but realize that in their speeches, they said that it's just symmetric. And therefore, that proves to them that they are still also just minimizing people's choices at the end of the day, and they can't maximize that optionality, right? The fourth, comparatively, they accuse us of having no solid stance. But in reality, we told you the median interpretation and replied to all of the outcomes that they're trying to push to us. Firstly, if it is in some ways accurate, but in other ways inaccurate, then that's a good thing, because that's how you get closure. It's something to wean you off of the person. You know that they're not alive, but you have one small snippet of them that you can talk to and learn information from if that helps you get closure. But even if it's inaccurate, you can reminisce about the person. It evokes your real memories about them when you ask something and they answer it wrongly. And therefore, at least you know what their thoughts likely were at the time. But even if it's not, you still benefit from that. We told you very clearly that even if it's not perfect, it's just better than cold turkey losing this kind of person at the end of the day, right? The third reason why we should win is because of our mountain of unresponded material. Shireen, in the reply speech, tries to cover it up by saying, no, we never respond if it doesn't work. Firstly, if it's inaccurate, again, you reminisce. You say, that's not my dad. He was so much smarter than that. That is what I said in my speech, to no response. But secondly, that inaccuracy becomes positive because you imagine the best of them as represented by their mannerisms on social media. And therefore, if you want to imagine that you're proud, at least on our side, you believe that they were proud at the time, like they're not alive now, but they were proud at the time because it reflects all of their mannerisms, simulates their humor, simulates the exact kind of compassion. But the biggest reason we should win this debate, and this is the biggest thing, is because all of their arguments are disconnected from the real motion, right? They say that you ban choices when they are bad. No, you do not. I told you about epistemic access in my constructive speech, right? They built this in reply, but in my deputy speech, I told you about epistemic access. You do not ban things as long as you don't know for sure what is the best for different kinds of people who have different ways of coping. And that's why, yes, you support the use of something because obviously you don't force everyone to use it, but at least the accessibility to it or the ability to use it, even in the worst case, if everyone does use it, ultimately is something that falls within freedom of choice. You don't ban virtual reality. You don't ban video games. You can't just assert that this is bad for grieving because some people don't like cold turkey. Some people need to wean themselves off of it a little bit. And that's why, regardless of their semantics and how they try to gaslight you, we've proven to you why, in the best case and in the worst case, we win. Thanks.
All right, thank you everybody for the debate. That was very good. I invite both sides to obviously cross the floor, shake hands. Since we're all in the main